Here it is. Go ahead, Ajita.
All right. Thank you, Prerna. I'll keep this short in the interest of time. I know folks have a busy April, usually in the month. So yeah, getting started. First of all, thank you to the 4W group for really funding this work. I am very, very thankful to be a part of this very rich community as well. I think the funds definitely help, but this intellectual conversation actually is often sometimes more helpful. So I really appreciate that part. So talking about this project, this is really kind of thinking about the environments that we live in, right? The built environments around us and how it has an impact on our health and well-being. So this project is really focused on the built environment of informal housing communities. This one is focused in India, looking through what is the impact of living in such environments and how these environments change under top-down urban policies, and how can we amplify women's voices in really helping to think through how these policies can be changed, adapted to think about more long-term socially sustainable housing solutions in our urban cities. And this is a big challenge kind of throughout, right? So giving you a little bit more context about where this project is focused. Thank you, Prerna, for right on cue for moving on to the next slide. So this project is focused in the city of Ahmedabad in Western India, in the state of Gujarat. And one of the recent sort of housing policy there is something called an in situ redevelopment policy. So what the government does is it goes into these informal housing communities. So the image that you see on the left in 2012, this was how the housing community really looked like, very organic, kind of self-built structures. And then this community transforms into these low-rise redeveloped housing, the image that you see on your right in 2018, right? So over a period of 6 years, this community really transforms in terms of what is the built environment that the people are living in. But the really interesting part is that the people, the community members actually remain the same, right? So it's the same people, the same site, the same neighborhood, just their housing, what their housing looks like changes, right? So I think that's a really exciting thing to look at. If you could go to the next slide, Prerna, thank you. So then this project really asks this question. All right, if the built form is changing, how does that have an impact on people's social networks? How do women form social connections in the informal housing, and how do these social connections really transform in the redeveloped housing, even if it's all the same people, right? So there's a lot of work talking about our social relationships are really informed by our built environment, right? The number of friends that I have can be impacted by the kind of street that I live in, the kind of house that I live in, right? And vice versa, our social networks also inform our built environments. So this project really looks at, does the social network change for women when they live in these two different kinds of housing situations? If you could move to the next slide. So just to give you a very quick overview of what these environments look like. So these two images show pre-redevelopment space, right? So these are informal housing communities. These are kind of the interstitial spaces that women interact in, socially connect in, right? So the image that you see on your left, you see people kind of walking by. So this is a main path of movement, but at the same time, it's a very important space for social connection. You would see these kind of movable cots that the people are sitting on, that people put outside their homes and form kind of an impromptu space of social interaction. Or on the right, these kind of threshold spaces between the inside and the outside that occur in this informal settlement. And these threshold spaces are used for social interaction. And if you go to the next slide, this shows you the redeveloped settlement, right? So after it has been redeveloped. So what we see is kind of the threshold spaces go away, these interstitial spaces go away. There is the inside and the outside, right? There's no intermediary space. So that's kind of a crucial issue, right? So thinking about then the research questions within this study, we are looking at due to this change in this built environment, how do social networks change? So what I'm doing is actually adapting social networks analysis tool, which hasn't been unfortunately used in these kind of settings of informal communities. So I'm using that theoretical lens and bringing that to a very different context. And we are trying to understand, as people kind of change, as the built environments change, does the network size change for what your social network looks like? Does the density of your social network change? Does the formation, is this a more heterogeneous social network, homogeneous social network? What are the within neighborhood ties? We also begin to think about, how does the design or the spatial characteristic of this space differ from slum housing or informal settlement housing to redeveloped housing? And finally, we begin to think about, once these social networks change, what is the impact of this change on perceived level of social support for women, their subjective well-being, right? So is there some kind of relationship between this change in social network and change in well-being overall? So if you could move to the next slide, Prerna. Thank you. So what we've done up until this point, and this is, I've done kind of a smaller project before this, that looked at more qualitative work. So I've done interviews, focus groups, and this part of the project is more focused on actually connecting this social network data, right? That we can actually map out people's connections between the two neighborhoods and compare these network bubbles, right? So we have identified the sites. We'll be comparing one community that is not redeveloped but is in waiting to be redeveloped, and then one community that has already been redeveloped. So we'll be comparing the network characteristics of the two sites. So the sites have been identified. We have done kind of the methods, the adaptation of social network methods into a different cultural context. We've pilot tested those methods. The IRB is done earlier in March, and I plan to collect data for this. I plan to do the field work this summer to then do the data analysis and dissemination following in the next semester. Yeah. So I just want to pause here and say thank you to the 4W group for sponsoring this work. I'm really excited for the summer.